in light of the Rakan changes being announced the other day, and them being targeted specifically at Rakan's Q satisfaction level, I thought I would release a video talking about how to actually increase Rakan's satisfaction, not just on his Q, but across all of his abilities, and also reducing frustration in the process while increasing Rakan's power level by a minimal amount, because it is very possible to do. And I'm going to show you how to do it right now. It's for you, anyone at Riot Games. You're welcome. Take the weekend off. I did your work, did your job for you. There you go. So let me show you, because it's very, very easy. All you need to do is play the champ, and honestly, it comes pretty naturally after that. You just kind of get it. Unfortunately, there's no one at Riot that actually plays Rakan, understands the frustrations behind playing this champion, so naturally, a change that is meant at increasing satisfaction just looks like a number inflation. Wow, my Q really feels satisfying now that the numbers are bumped by a crazy amount, but I still have to bypass the intentionally unintuitive mechanic for an area of effect heal with the fact that it's automatic. So yeah, even though it's gonna be satisfying because it's better, it's not actually more satisfying. It's just better. It's still frustrating to use in a lot of cases. So instead of this, do this. Let me get into it. I'm gonna start with the Q when you're just talking about it. So the idea is that why would we increase the actual potency of the heal instead of just making it easier to utilize? It's an area of effect heal that automatically heals upon touching the first ally, which means you can't actually intentionally position yourself in a way most of the time to get a bigger heal off on your allies, because you can't position to the middle of your team and then have it go, because it just automatically goes. Which also means your idiot teammate that's full health can just randomly eat your heal, and then you can't heal your half health 80 carry. And that feels really bad. Wow, this increased healing really helps me when my full health Jax eats my full heal. Wow. Or he eats my heal. Wow. So, the idea is make it a recast system, which means, A, you can intentionally go into the middle of your team and heal them all, and you don't have to increase the heal, and that can feel so much more satisfying and so much more potent without needing to have to buff the numbers at all. And also, it also prevents you from dying to damage over time abilities while you Q them, and then you can't manually heal. Because if you have no ally nearby, you have no way to activate your heal early on Rakan. You don't. You have to sit there and wait out the 3 seconds. Ignite lasts 5 seconds though, so you might just eat majority of the ticks and just die. And that feels really bad, because, wow, if I could manually reactivate, I would have lived there. So, anyways, very easy way to increase satisfaction of Rakan's Q without needing to buff the numbers at all. Very easy. Takes a single time of playing Rakan to figure this stuff out, but they just don't play Rakan. This is what the changes should be. All of these should be completely reverted and never put to live servers. These are bad for the champion long term, and it'll make it a lot harder to have Rakan get into a long-term balanced state going forward. It'll also prevent them from taking a look at Rakan more often in the future, because they'll think, oh, he's in a fine spot, we buffed him there. And it's like, no, you gave him a stupid buff. You're buffing his Q poke build or an AP Rakan mid build, and that is not at all what Rakan is currently balanced around. He's currently balanced around his engage. All they're doing is buffing up an alternative playstyle, when in reality his engage playstyle needs a small little oomph and some quality of life changes to really be put in a super viable, awesome, long-term balanced state. Yet here they are, randomly doing this for the second time in a row. It is nonsensical. Remove all these, never put them in live servers, and just put this in instead. Honestly, so much better. And maybe put in a couple of these other things that I'm going to go over. Speaking of which, the passive, a way to make this have increased satisfaction and reduced frustration, very similarly to the Q, in terms of not dying to damage over time right before the ability comes off cooldown. Have it so the shield trickles in 3 seconds before it actually comes off cooldown, because 3 seconds before the ability comes off cooldown, an animation begins where it goes boing, and then it comes off cooldown, and you get the full shield. How about when the animation begins, the shield starts trickling in about a third each second. So then you don't die to damage over times right before your passive shield comes off cooldown. Wow, and then suddenly it doesn't feel like garbage. That's awesome, right? This would be fantastic, right? Saves you from dying to random damage over times, very much like the Q change as well. Super simple, not a power increase at all, and it would really feel so much more satisfying, feel so much less frustrating in these very specific scenarios. To move on, this one's definitely a bit controversial. I think people overstate the effectiveness of this buff. It's the idea that Rakan's W should be unstoppable, because very frequently the most common way of Rakan's W getting interrupted is when it's accidental. Because as it turns out, as a Rakan player, you have to be very thoughtful and holistic of the idea that, oh wow, this guy can stop my W, and this guy can stop my W, and this guy can stop my W with this, so you need to be very careful. And so You're waiting it all out, and then from Fog of War, you'll like R and then E to your teammate and then try to W in. But because, say, the Syndra already aimed a stun at the teammate you're jumping to, she accidentally stopped your W, even though you really outplayed it by playing off from Fog of War from this side. It doesn't really matter, because you have to jump to your teammate really to get a more potent engage, unless you have flashing going from the side, but that's not always applicable, and yada yada. So the idea here is that the main time the Rakan's W gets interrupted is when it's accidental. So let's just introduce Unstoppable, so then that stops happening. It is so frustrating having your W be interrupted by a person not even trying to interrupt it. That is ridiculous. That wouldn't happen with any other champion. So why is it happening to Rakan still? It's super ridiculous. People think how this is actually going to work, and this is why they start freaking out when I mention this, is they're like, oh my gosh, Rakan's going to like W, ignore CC, and then knock out my whole team and kill them. Here's the issue, or here's the reality of it, really, how it is. It's a 600 range ability that you need to be closer than 600 range to actually have it guaranteed land on the people that you're trying to aim on. So, you need to be that close to have it eat the CC and then also hit all of them. Okay, so that's not gonna happen. In reality, that won't happen because so many other CC abilities in this game, in fact, almost all of them have higher range than Rakan's W, which means they can just hit Rakan with a CC ability from farther than his W range, then Rakan cannot do it anymore. He cannot find an engage through CC. That's as simple as that. If they want to CC him, when they see him pop R, it's like, okay, this is super easy now. We just use an ability from far range, because our stun range or whatever range is longer than Rakan's W range, and boom, we just interrupt it. If Rakan then wants to use his W at that exact point to then eat the CC, but he is short of the actual range of his targets, then he just completely wasted his engage. So it doesn't actually matter. So the only time that this achieves this perfect scenario in which you eat the CC and you jump on your targets is when they react late. Because almost every CC in this game has longer range than Rakan's W. And it's super telegraphed because you pop the R and you run towards them. Or you just have to walk towards them all slowly and then press W. So it's very telegraphed. It's very, very telegraphed. Very easy to outrange with CC. So if they don't outrange it with CC, then that's on them and they should be getting punished. So in reality, all it's doing is getting rid of the very frustrating scenario in which they accidentally stop your W. And that's really about it. In reality, it's not nearly as crazy as you think it is, because you can just trade CC with Rakan's W, which means right before you get hit by it, get hit by the knockup, you just cast your CC ability. So then you just hit them both at the exact same time, but because Rakan's CC lasts so short, it's only 1 second, lasts so short, nice job, man. Good language. It lasts such a short time, it will always get out-durationed, out-lengthened by all these other CC abilities. For example, you W on top of a Thresh. Let's say he has brain damage and he doesn't just press play to cancel your W, right? Okay, great. Then, right as you're about to hit your knockup, the Thresh will press his Q. Because you cannot cancel cast times in this game, as you knock up Thresh, he then hits you with a hook. His hook outlasts the duration of your knockup, so he gets to move first, and really that turns you landing a good engage on the Thresh, if you're trying to pick him off, into you getting caught out, because now he has a longer CC than you. So in reality, the thing that smart players do, which is just trade CC with Rakan's W, still remains the top strategy. Also, mobility, which is very easy to counter Rakan's W with, still remains a top strategy, and you can still CC him from beyond the 600 range of his W, so that's also still there. So in reality, this only punishes really bad players and not really anything else, because every other player will just either use a more potent strategy, like the trade CC thing, or they will just outrange Rakan's W and then just stun him anyways. So it just doesn't matter. It is only a notable power increase in a very specific scenario in which bad players play poorly. And frankly, it's okay that Rakan punishes a bad player for playing poorly. Anyways, this would reduce frustration by a crazy amount because, yeah, you should not be accidentally interrupting people's abilities and nullifying their entire kits on an accident. That is completely ridiculous. Anyways, moving on. I'm surprised they have not implemented this one already, right? Just change Rakan's E to a charge system instead of a recast system. The entire point is, okay, well, Rakan has 2 dashes on his E, so we need to give it a long cooldown. It's like, okay, great. I didn't want to use a second dash after using my first dash. I just wanted to use the 1 dash for either mobility or for a shield. I didn't want to use a second one, but they're like, oh, but because you get a second one, it needs such a long cooldown. So now if I just want to use my E for a single use, then suddenly I suffer a crazy long cooldown, which feels terrible and really unintuitive. They're like, a majority of cases, you do not want to use Rakan Z more than once, or you are forced to use it more than once, or you can make use of it, but it's not exactly 100% optimal, and you'd rather have it be an uncharged system and just save it. So that's what this is here for. No more unintuitive garbage. It's just you use Rakan's E when you want to use it. That's plain and simple. There's a max of 2, which is for the 2 casts you get currently, but the idea is that per charge, it would be a longer cooldown than it is currently, right? Right now you get 2 dashes on a 20 to 12 second cooldown, and then you would get a single dash per 12 to 8 seconds. You'll notice if you times that by 2, that's 24 to 16. That's actually much higher than this. But now you get to specifically use them whenever you want to. You don't have to worry about this unintuitive recast system. You just use them when you want to. Feel a lot better for using your shield in particular in the early game because it's such a long cooldown. So this would go miles in making the champion feel a lot less frustrating, a lot more intuitive. I'm shocked this hasn't been implemented already, because as you'll notice, right, we just increased the average wait time for like the charges, right? And there you go. Now his mobility actually isn't crazy. In fact, this is actually nerfed. In the mid to late game, he will get straight up way less mobility than he does currently, but at least it'll be intentional mobility. He will choose to use it. It will feel more satisfying that way, while actually making him overall weaker in a lot of scenarios. So frankly, I don't see why this hasn't been implemented already. This could also be 11 to 7 seconds if this is too high, but I erred on the side of caution for this one. But really, this could be 11 to 7 seconds based on level per charge as well, which will then be 22 to 14 based on ability rank, as opposed to like right now. So anyways, I'm surprised this one hasn't been implemented. This one is so inoffensive, as just like the Q one and the passive. The passive Q and the E quality of life changes I'm recommending are so inoffensive, it's honestly criminal that they have not been introduced already. The W one obviously has a situation, specifically as I outlined, that it is potently stronger than it was before by a really solid amount, like by a really strong amount. But obviously that situation only comes when it's a bad player making a mistake, so I think it's fine still. But even then, it's more offensive than the passive Q and E. The fact that passive Q and E changes have not already been implemented, honestly, like this one's a little outside the box, the passive one, right? But like the fact that the Q one and the E one have not been implemented already, frankly, is a crime. They're so inoffensive, and they reduce frustration by such a high amount, while also not increasing the power level of the champions at all. I have no idea what they're doing, why these haven't been implemented yet. If they had a single person on like the Riot Games team that played Rakan, these would be implemented already. Because these are so simple in increasing quality of life and reducing frustration by a large amount without increasing the power at all. To move on, just like the W, this is a more offensive change in terms of like people maybe like, I don't like it. So the idea is that you increase Rakan's charm range by a little bit. So then because you're used to 50 charm range, suddenly 75 will feel very generous. That's all it is. It would just feel a little bit better without really increasing it by a ton. Keep in mind, right, like a champion like Rel gets like a 450 dragon on her ult into her 250 radius knockup. Rakan gets a 50 charm range that comes into a 250 radius knockup. You see how Rel's makes sense because it's a bigger one that pulls into a smaller one, and then Rakan's is a smaller one into a bigger one. See how backwards that is? Because it doesn't make any sense. Because the whole point is it's supposed to drag into the knockup. It's the whole point. But Rakan's doesn't really function like that. And obviously it never really has. It was never really the point. But like on release it was 200 charm range. Bit excessive probably, but then it got reduced to 150, or at least they tried to. Then they forgot to add a 1, and that became 50, and then the years of bullshit commenced from there, and they lied about it, and it became 50 permanently, despite no intentional change for that to be the case ever. So increasing it to 75, which is half of 150, which is still where it should be to this day, by the way, if they never made that small number error. Someone didn't forget to add a 1 to that 150. So this is frankly not as offensive as you'd think, but I could see people being like, oh my gosh, it's going to make this engage so much easier. But it really wouldn't. 75 is still super small, but it would feel way better in comparison to the 50 charm range, which is basically just inside of Rakan's body, which feels terrible. You can visually be touching people and you will not charm them. That's how awful the 50 charm range is. I cannot stress how bad that is. So 75 would feel way better for any like Rakan player that has been playing him and been used to the 50 charm range. And that's all it would really do. Such a minor increase, it would not be a tangible buff at all whatsoever. While also feeling a lot better for anyone that currently plays Rakan. So, in addition to all these quality of life changes I just kind of suggested, I also think in addition to some of these quality of life changes, that Rakan, instead of these Q buffs for no reason that he's receiving, should be receiving a small W buff instead. I think the combination of a small W buff on Rakan and some of these quality of life changes would put him in a really healthy, long-term balanced state, where they don't really have to touch him really forever if they don't want to, because I think he'll just be in a really balanced spot where he's solidly viable at all points, but never meta, never strong. Because that's how I think Rakan best fits into League of Legends, personally. So, because there's already a lot of very easy Enchanter champions, so having a very skillful underdog champion that needs to outplay his opponents but then has big rewards when he does perform really skillfully and outplay them, I think is a really cool niche to have. That's what attracted me to the champ, or at least part of one of the reasons, one of the reasons, even though he's definitely not as difficult, or he's definitely more difficult today than he was on release, still. So, we should not make Rakan more like other enchanters. We should kind of celebrate what he is in the game by keeping him in that state, right? And he's really close to achieving that perfectly balanced state, in my opinion. He's really, really close. And then all of a sudden they're doing this huge band-aid buff that's going to make it really difficult to revisit Rakan in the future for quality of life changes or for a small W buff, because they're going to say like, oh, we already gave a big one to him. He's in a completely fine spot now. And obviously this will still inflate the win rate a bit, even though this is not at all what he should be receiving. So revert this. Do not implement these at all. This is bad for the champion, and it'll make it a lot harder to achieve that long-term balanced state. Or at the very least, it's going to suck some of the power budget of some of what should be the W buff, in my opinion. So I think to achieve this beautifully balanced long-term state, where they don't have to touch them, they should do some of these quality of life changes, because if they're not going to touch them, they should definitely fix some of the frustration, and then give a small buff to the W for his engaged playstyle that literally every Rakan player prefers over poke. No one plays Rakan for his Q. No one plays Rakan to poke. Almost nobody plays Rakan for his Enchanter elements either. They play him for his engage. That is why you play the champion, so why are we buffing his non-engage? Nobody cares about Rakan's Q. This is the second time in a row that they've buffed it like this. Stop doing that. No one asked for that. Small buff to the W, as opposed to a big buff to the Q, would go so much further in being satisfying to Rakan players. And a small W buff would look like this. So I think they could go one of two ways. They could either remove one of the three major counterplays found for Rakan's W, which is mobility, right? Just using mobility to dodge it, using CC to interrupt it if you're keen, and then using high movement speed, either tier 2 boots or a movement speed increase for whatever reason, to just walk out of Rakan's W. So removing one of those three major counterplays would make the ability feel a lot more consistent versus that one particular class of counterplay, which would feel a lot better. It'd feel like he at least has more of a specific niche into those champions and can function better into those champions. Obviously, he only gets the 1 second CC reward with no CC follow-up, unlike every other engaged support in the game, who has at least a follow-up CC ability to their primary engage ability. Everyone but Rakan, by the way, but okay, as long as it's more consistent, it wouldn't really matter. Or, instead of reducing or removing one of those three major counterplays, they can just keep all the current counterplays, but increase the reward for landing the ability, because frankly, it's a really dangerous ability. You jump into the middle of the enemy team to get a 1 second knockout. It's like high risk, low reward. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So really, we should be increasing the reward to really match the risk that the ability provides. Yes, you can E out afterwards, but you still run the risk of Wing and getting CC'd and dying. Whereas a hook champion could just throw it from afar. A champion like Thresh doesn't even have to fully invest into it if he does land it. So it's either reducing some of the counterplays to make it a little bit more consistent, or increasing the reward but keeping the counterplays. One of those two are the way to go. Which way they go, I don't care. I think both are completely fine, right? In regards to what some of these would look like, in regards to countering mobility and making that a less potent counterplay to Rakan's W, they could make it so whenever Rakan reaches his destination, he creates a grounded effect until his knockup lands, where essentially, obviously you guys know what that means, it means that you can't use any mobility spells. So that would guarantee that you cannot use a mobility spell out of Rakan's W if they react late. Keep in mind, this would only appear as Rakan reaches his destination, which means they still have about 0.4 seconds to actually, to still react and dodge away, which means good players would still be able to react keenly and dodge it. Because honestly, when Rakan slowly walks up to you, you can very easily tell, oh, he's going to use W here, because he's really close to me, and it's got 600 range, so you know he's going to use W, because why would he get that close otherwise? So they can be ready, and then press the button and dodge right as he's dashing in. So good players can still avoid this. It's just when you perform sloppy, and Rakan gets the jump on you, now you will actually get hit by the 1 second knockup as you should. It's still only a 1 second knockup with low base damage early. Why does it have to be so easy to dodge, right? Then, once again, we're revisiting this concept of make Rakan's W unstoppable, so then they can't use CC to interrupt it. I already kind of mentioned earlier, honestly, majority of the time when Rakan's W gets interrupted, it's unintentional. It's completely unintentional. But sometimes it is intentional. But still, they probably shouldn't have that option. Like, once again, it's a 1-second knockup with low base damage early, and it puts Rakan in a really vulnerable position. Does it really need to be this easy to counterplay by everything? So they could remove the ability to interrupt it by making it unstoppable. Once again, you can still trade CC with it, so that counterplay is still absolutely there, and it's still much more potent than canceling Rakan's W anyways, because then it puts Rakan in a much worse position. But, whatever. What do I know? I only play the champion. Anyways, and then going on to the last one, in regards to high movement speed targets, we would increase Rakan's W radius and missile speed by a tad bit. So then at close point-blank ranges, when they walk up into Rakan, Rakan can guaranteed land the 1-second knockup. Because if they're walking up to Rakan, they should be eating what Rakan can dish out, which is a 1-second knockup. Once again, that's the only thing this champion provides. So really, why is it such a problem that it's so consistent when they walk right up to Rakan, they're basically begging for it? The fact that with high movement speed, they can walk out of Rakan's W at a point-blank range is frankly disturbing. Once again, it's only a 1-second knockup and still has low base damage early. So this would make it much more consistent at close range uses from the range increase, the radius increase. And then also, this would make max range usages also much more consistent with the missile speed increase as well. Which, by the way, this is a revert of a ghost nerf they did the day of the patch for patch 9.9's mini rework. So also, just a small little fun fact to that as well. This is probably what it should be had Riot not randomly ghost nerfed in the day of the patch. So, that's how it should be. But once again, maybe Riot thinks, maybe you think, that maybe instead of reducing one of the 3 major counterplays, you just make the ability more rewarding but keeping the counterplays. Which I think that's honestly a fair alternative as well. So these are my 2 ideas for this. One of them is reducing the cooldown early and increasing the base damage at all levels, but mostly early game. Obviously, the argument here is that, well, that's way too high base damage. 100 level 1 is way too high. Because, like, usually the argument is, okay, and as I mentioned here, Blitzcrank, Thresh, and Pike all have at least 100 base damage, like, abilities. So why can't Rakan have it? Well, the argument is usually, well, Rakan's W hits 2 people. But if they're standing on top of each other with a 250 radius, they really deserve to eat that punishment. Like, if they're positioning that poorly, that you are getting hit by both enemies are getting hit by Rakan's knockup, you deserve to eat that base damage. It's very easy to not stand within 250 radius of one another. It's very easy to do that. So if they're doing it, they deserve to be punished. And it's okay that Rakan punishes people for making really bad positional errors like that. It's okay that he does that. Other engaged sports do that. Why can't Rakan do that? So we increase the base damage so then he's actually, like, his W actually does something in early laning phase now, which is awesome, because right now it just really doesn't. It just doesn't really do a whole lot at all. Usually, it's so bad that engaging, even when they are making an error, is just a bad idea, because you just come up short every time, because your base damages are terrible, your CC is terrible, and then you have super long cooldowns and higher mana costs. So it's like, okay, why do I even bother with this then? So the idea here is this allows Rakan to properly punish people a bit better and encourage him to jump in a bit more often by lowering the cooldown in the early game, but keeping it the same later on and increasing the damage early on as well. Because Rakan does not share the same threat in lane as other engaged supports, and that's okay, because Rakan is mostly about scaling to the late game anyways. But it should not be this bad. This is comically bad. 70 is really, really terrible. Anyways, so that's the idea, is increase the reward in terms of damage and make the uptime a bit higher early on. Or they could go, this could be way too much. This could be a bit too much, but we could increase the duration of the knockup from 1 second to 1.25 seconds. It sounds crazy because obviously you can't reduce it via tenacity, so that's a guaranteed 1.25 seconds. And obviously with the ultimate engage, that could be too much because you're comboing CC from the ultimate. But for Rakan's W in general, this is completely fine, in my opinion. The idea is that every other engaged support has at least 1.5 seconds of CC through having a secondary ability to chain CC off of their initial engage CC ability. Except for Rakan. He's the only engager who doesn't get to do that, who doesn't have a follow-up CC ability to his primary engage CC ability. He's the only one. What does he get in return? He gets, like, a pretty crappy shield that offers no additional effect, and oftentimes he has to, like, sacrifice his mobility to use, and then a Q that gets blocked by minions and has a pretty, like, awful heal and awful damage. Obviously, they're trying to buff this, but that's besides the point. Why not just make his engage stronger instead of making his Q damage stronger? So, instead, the idea is that we increase his knockup duration So then he doesn't have a secondary CC spell like everyone else. He still has less, right? He still has, like, everyone else is at least 1.5 seconds, sometimes even more than that. Rakan is still only getting 1.25 seconds. But obviously versus tenacity up targets, this could debatably be stronger than the 1.5 second CC chain stun, for example. But it's okay if Rakan does well uniquely into tenacity targets. I think that could give him a solid niche as well. These are not the only changes, but I think honestly, if they did do one of these like 5W changes in regards to reducing or removing counterplay, while keeping 2 of the other counterplays intact, or increasing the reward while keeping the counterplays, in addition to some of these quality of life changes I've recommended, especially like, honestly, like I said, I'm surprised the E, the Q, and the passive have not already been implemented. These are very obvious changes in my opinion, especially the Q and the E. So if they did some quality of life changes, and they did one of these smaller W buffs, obviously some of these are a bit bigger than others, I think this one could definitely be problematic potentially. Maybe they'd have to tone on the numbers a little bit, but they could increase the knock duration by a little bit, considering that's all Rakan really offers anyways. So the idea is a small W buff and some quality of life changes would put Rakan in this awesome spot where long-term he is completely balanced and they don't really need to touch him ever again. Because he's so close to achieving that spot, and this is going to ruin that. These changes are going to prevent Rakan from reaching that point, and I really don't want to see that, because this is going to, like I said, this is going to hinder Riot from revisiting Rakan in the future, because they already feel like, oh, he's fine, we give him that big Q buff, and it's like, great, nobody wanted that. We would rather see a small W buff and quality of life changes than a big Q buff that no one asked for. So do not put these changes to live. If someone at Riot is listening, please do not put these changes to live. Do not do this. It's not good for the champion long term. It will make him stronger, but that's not necessarily a good thing because it's being put into the wrong areas of his kit. No one wants a Q-Max Rakan. You want Engage Rakan. So give Engage Rakan a small buff, and that's all you need to do. In addition to some quality of life changes that really, I'm shocked haven't been implemented yet, frankly. So that's the end of this. Please do not put these changes to live. This is going to make the champion not very healthy long term. Nobody asked for this. Please do this instead, or something along these lines. Anyways, that's what I'm going to call it. If you're curious about how these changes actually do land when they go live inevitably in like about a week or so, I stream over at twitch.tv/featherdaddylull in the description. Gosh, I sound like a YouTuber. Okay, so I'll see you there. Okay, bye. Bye.